It was supposed to be a normal day for Marlene. The kind of day that followed the predictable rhythm of her comfortable routine. At 72, life had taught her how to appreciate the small moments, the aroma of morning coffee, the sound of birds chirping outside her window, and the familiar, comforting walk to the local library. But today was different. Today, she was flying first class for the first time in her life. It was supposed to be a gift, a treat for herself after years of modest living. After retiring from teaching high school English and spending decades shaping young minds, Marlene felt she had earned this luxury. A first-class ticket, the thought of it alone, felt almost absurd to her. But there she was, a woman who had worked hard all her life, her fingers gripped tightly around the boarding pass with a sense of quiet excitement. The flight was from her small hometown in Northern California to New York City, where her daughter had recently moved. It had been a long while since she had seen her daughter, and the promise of reconnecting after years of phone calls and occasional emails had filled Marlene with joy. She was looking forward to the trip, eager to spend time with her family, visit museums, walk through the busy streets, and savor the city's eclectic food scene. The anticipation of the adventure ahead made her feel alive, like she was a young woman again, ready to explore. She made her way through the airport terminal, feeling the usual hustle of people moving about. Marlene was used to traveling, but this time, she felt the subtle thrill of doing something extraordinary. She'd saved for months for this trip, budgeting her money carefully to afford the upgrade to first class. A little splurge, she thought, after a lifetime of small, careful steps. The flight attendants greeted her as she boarded the plane, their professional smiles and polite nods comforting her. The rich leather seats in the first-class cabin made her feel as though she had entered another world, one of luxury, refinement, and calm. She slid into her seat by the window, feeling a surge of gratitude for being able to experience this. She marveled at the spaciousness of the seat, the plush pillows, and the blanket waiting for her, as though they had all been designed with her comfort in mind. Her mind wandered to the years she had spent working tirelessly as a teacher, grading papers late into the night, helping students navigate life's challenges, and planning lessons. She had earned this moment. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marlene gazed out the window, watching the world below grow smaller and smaller, and felt a sense of peace wash over her. But that peace was short-lived. The calm was shattered as she felt a sharp tap on her shoulder. Marlene turned, her heart skipping a beat. Standing in front of her was the flight attendant, a woman in her 30s with a tight-lipped expression. The woman was impeccably dressed, her uniform crisp and professional, but there was something in her demeanor that made Marlene feel uneasy. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, her voice cool and uninviting. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to a different seat." Marlene blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but her pulse quickening. The attendant's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she were trying to figure out the best way to explain. "There's been a mix-up. This seat is assigned to someone else. I'll need you to move to coach." Marlene's face flushed with surprise and then, immediately, embarrassment. She had booked her ticket months ago and had specifically selected a first-class seat. She was sure of it. She reached for her boarding pass, her hands trembling slightly, and showed it to the attendant. "But this is my seat," Marlene said firmly, her voice trembling now as confusion and a hint of frustration built within her. "I've paid for this seat. I have a first-class ticket." The attendant didn't budge. She glanced at the boarding pass and then at Marlene's face, but her expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm going to have to ask you to move. There's a mix-up, and we need to sort it out." The words felt dismissive, even condescending. Marlene's pulse began to race as she processed what was happening. Was this really happening to her? She couldn't believe it. She had worked so hard to afford this luxury. She was a paying customer, and yet, here she was, being asked to vacate the seat that she had every right to occupy. Marlene felt a wave of indignation rush through her, followed by a sense of helplessness. "I'm not moving," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This is my seat." The attendant's eyes hardened. "I'm going to have to call the supervisor, then," she said coolly. "We can't have this situation go on." As if on cue, a man appeared from the aisle. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the same airline uniform. The supervisor's presence only made Marlene feel more small and helpless. She had been calm until this moment, but now she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The supervisor was all business, his eyes scanning the situation quickly before addressing Marlene with a neutral tone. "I'm afraid you're going to have to move," he said. "There's been a mistake with your seat. The other passenger is boarding soon, and we need to accommodate them in first class." Marlene's mouth went dry. "I don't understand." "This is my seat," she repeated. "I have a first-class ticket." The supervisor glanced at her boarding pass but didn't look at her with any empathy. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you'll need to move. The flight is full, and we need to make sure everyone is seated appropriately. I'll help you find a seat in coach." Her head swirled. The humiliation was already overwhelming. Marlene had been a teacher for decades, an educator who always fought for her students, always stood up for the underdog. But in that moment, she felt small, insignificant. She was just an elderly woman being pushed aside by the cold, corporate machine. The idea of moving to coach, to sit among the cramped, uncomfortable seats in the back of the plane, felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Despite her frustration, Marlene stood up slowly, not wanting to make a scene. She grabbed her small handbag and turned toward the narrow aisle. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her as she walked past them, her steps slow, her heart heavy. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As she took her seat in coach, the cramped space felt like a prison. The seat was too small, the person next to her too close, and the constant hum of the plane's engines only heightened her sense of isolation. She wanted to disappear, to shrink down to nothing, but she didn't. Instead, she stared ahead, trying to ignore the sting of rejection, and resolved to hold on to what little dignity she had left. But the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The first-class cabin behind her seemed like a distant memory now, a world she no longer belonged to. The flight attendants continued their duties, and the other passengers whispered among themselves, some offering sympathetic glances, others pretending not to notice. Marlene buried her face in her lap, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her chest. But she wouldn't let it go. Not yet. Just as she began to settle into the uncomfortable reality of coach, an announcement crackled over the intercom, stopping her thoughts cold. The captain's voice came through, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with the plane. We'll be making an emergency landing shortly. Please remain in your seats and follow all safety instructions." Marlene blinked in disbelief, the words ringing in her ears. Emergency landing? What did that mean for her now? The plane's sudden change in course jolted Marlene out of her daze. She tightened her grip on the armrests, the hum of the engines shifting into a more urgent tone. The stewardess began her safety instructions, her voice crackling over the intercom with an air of authority, but all Marlene could do was stare out the small window beside her, her mind racing. What did this mean for her? For everyone on the plane? She could feel the collective tension in the cabin, nervous whispers, furtive glances exchanged between passengers. Some of them were gripping their armrests tightly, while others were looking around, searching for signs of what was to come. Marlene had flown enough to understand the procedures, but this felt different. There was an edge to the announcement, something unspoken in the captain's voice that suggested the situation was more serious than it seemed. She glanced back toward the first-class cabin, her eyes catching a glimpse of the empty seats she had vacated just hours before. She thought of the luxury she had been so excited about and how quickly it had been snatched away, replaced by this sudden chaos. The plane began to descend, and Marlene could feel the pressure in her ears, the change in altitude, the slight tilt of the aircraft. There was no sense of calm anymore, the air was thick with tension, and Marlene was overwhelmed with a strange mixture of frustration and anxiety. The flight attendants moved swiftly down the aisles, their expressions focused, and Marlene watched them, searching for any hint of what might be happening. But their stoic professionalism only added to her unease. As the plane descended, the jarring sensation of turbulence made Marlene's stomach churn. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push away the rising panic. She didn't know what was happening, but something told her that this was more than just a simple mechanical issue. The emergency landing was clearly not planned, and the passengers were beginning to feel the strain of the uncertainty. It wasn't until the plane finally leveled out and the engines quieted that the captain's voice returned to the intercom, this time with a more calming tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to make an emergency landing at a nearby airport. We ask that you remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened as we begin our approach. Thank you for your cooperation." Marlene's heart hammered in her chest. She had never experienced anything like this in all her years of flying. Her mind was racing, and she was still grappling with the humiliation from earlier, feeling completely out of place in the back of the plane. She wasn't sure what to expect next, but the thought of an emergency landing, of something going wrong, only added to her sense of helplessness. What if something went wrong? What if the worst happened? Marlene tried to push the thoughts aside, but they clung to her like a dark cloud, unwilling to dissipate. As the plane began to descend further, she caught sight of the runway ahead. The city lights below twinkled in the distance, but the sight didn't bring her comfort. Instead, it filled her with a sense of dread. She gripped the armrests tighter, trying to steady her breath, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this flight, this day, had already gone far beyond what she had expected. Finally, the wheels of the plane hit the tarmac with a loud thud, and the force of the landing caused Marlene to tense up. The plane bounced briefly before the tires caught, and she could feel the immediate deceleration as the aircraft slowed down. The captain's voice came through again, this time reassuring the passengers that they had arrived safely and that the crew would provide further instructions once the plane had come to a complete stop. Marlene exhaled a shaky breath, her chest tight with the weight of the experience. She had never felt so powerless, so insignificant. As the plane taxied slowly to the gate, she caught herself staring out the window once again, the streetlights casting long shadows across the runway. She had always prided herself on being strong, on facing adversity with grace. But this felt like too much. Her dignity had been trampled earlier, and now, as the aircraft finally came to a stop, she felt the sting of it once again. But then, something unexpected happened. The flight attendants began to move swiftly down the aisle again, but this time, they were addressing the passengers more directly, asking them to remain seated and to await instructions. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Marlene had never seen the crew so on edge. Something was happening, something beyond just a mechanical failure or a routine delay. As she sat there, her mind still spinning with the events of the past few hours, the flight attendant who had originally confronted her, Janet, suddenly appeared in the aisle, her face flushed, eyes darting around nervously. She walked up to Marlene, her demeanor a sharp contrast to the earlier coldness. "Ma'am, I apologize for earlier," Janet said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I didn't know about the seat mix-up. We've just been told that, due to the delay in the technical issues, the flight schedule has been altered. First class is now available again." Marlene blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "First class," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. There was some confusion about your seat earlier, but we've just been informed that you can return to your original seat. We're reassigning passengers, and we have a first-class seat available for you." Marlene couldn't believe her ears. After everything she had been through, the humiliation, the rudeness, the sense of being completely disregarded, now she was being told she could go back to first class? It felt surreal, as though the situation had flipped on its head. She glanced around at the other passengers, who seemed equally bewildered. Some of them were shaking their heads, others were murmuring to each other, but none seemed to know what to make of this unexpected turn of events. I don't know if I should," Marlene said, her voice steady but unsure. Her mind was still reeling from the whole ordeal, and the idea of going back to first class now, after everything that had happened, felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Janet took a step closer, her expression softening. "It's completely up to you, ma'am. We're just offering the seat to you again because of the situation. It's your choice." For a moment, Marlene hesitated. She thought of the embarrassment, the rush of anger that had surged through her earlier, and the humiliation she had felt in coach. She had been so angry, so upset. But now, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She had fought back in her own way. She hadn't allowed herself to be pushed around by Janet or the crew. She had been strong, and this moment, was her opportunity to regain what was rightfully hers. "I'll take the seat," she said firmly. Her voice, though calm, carried a sense of resolve she hadn't felt earlier. She wasn't going to let this moment of chaos dictate her actions anymore. She had earned this, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. Janet nodded and led the way back toward the first-class cabin, the passageway between the cramped rows of coach feeling even more suffocating now as Marlene made her way forward. When she reached the front of the plane, she stood at the threshold of the first-class section, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and discomfort. She glanced back over her shoulder, as if expecting to see the passengers in coach watching her. And they were, but she held her head high, walking past them with the quiet dignity she had nearly lost earlier. When she slid back into her first-class seat, the familiar luxury of the space enveloped her. She sank into the plush leather, the softness of the seat cushioning her body. The blanket and pillow were waiting for her once again, and she felt a sense of satisfaction, of justice. But as she settled in, the unsettling feeling from earlier lingered. The flight attendants moved past her, the hum of the engines was now a constant undercurrent, and the plane continued its journey toward New York. Marlene closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to breathe deeply and collect her thoughts. But there was no escaping the strange series of events that had unfolded. She had been forced out of first class, humiliated, and yet now she had been invited back. Her sense of accomplishment felt hollow, almost as though the victory had come too easily. She had been given a second chance, but at what the hours passed slowly as the plane continued its journey, the distant hum of the engines a constant backdrop to the whirlwind of emotions racing through Marlene's mind. As she sat in her first-class seat, she couldn't shake the strange sensation that lingered, like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Her hands rested on the armrests, fingers tapping nervously, though she tried to appear calm. There were fleeting moments when the discomfort faded, and she allowed herself to relax into the luxury of the seat, the soft pillow resting behind her back. But the memories of the earlier confrontation, the sharp sting of being denied her rightful place, kept creeping back into her thoughts, eroding any sense of peace. In the quiet, she could hear the murmurs of conversation around her. Passengers were still discussing the unexpected landing, the technical issues, the disorienting sense of being in limbo. Some had fallen asleep, their heads resting against the headrests, while others stared blankly ahead, unable to quiet their racing thoughts. The air felt heavy with unspoken questions. What had really happened? What was the cause of the delay? The unplanned landing? No one had the answers, not even the crew. The flight attendants remained tight-lipped, moving through the aisles with a practiced calm, their faces betraying little of the tension that surely lurked beneath the surface. Marlene's mind kept returning to the flight attendant, Janet. She couldn't help but replay their earlier interaction. Janet's apology had seemed sincere, but something about it had felt off. It was as though the woman had been forced into making the offer, as if there was a deeper reason behind her sudden change of heart. Marlene didn't like mysteries, especially ones that involved her. She had to know what had really happened, why everything had gone so wrong, so quickly. Her eyes flickered toward the cockpit door, and she briefly considered getting up to ask one of the flight attendants for more information. But she dismissed the thought almost immediately. It wasn't her place to intrude. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, staring out the window, the endless stretch of sky before her offering no answers. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her, each moment of uncertainty building on the last ost. And what, exactly, had she gained? Suddenly, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom once more, breaking the silence like a sharp crack in the air. Marlene sat up straight, her body immediately alert as his words filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that there has been another complication. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making another detour. Our flight path has been altered once again, and we will be landing at a different airport. Please remain in your seats, and we will keep you updated with further details." The announcement sent a ripple of shock through the cabin. Marlene's heart began to race again, her palms sweating as she looked toward the flight attendants, hoping for some sign of what was happening. Their faces were unreadable, but their movements were swift and deliberate as they began to prepare for another landing. Marlene's thoughts were spiraling, the words "unforeseen circumstances" echoing in her head. She had no idea what was going on, but she could sense that things were escalating. What had started as a routine flight was rapidly spiraling into something far more complicated, and she was caught in the middle of it. As the plane began its descent once more, Marlene's stomach dropped. The turbulence was worse this time, the plane shaking violently as it cut through the clouds. She gripped the armrests, her knuckles white as she tried to steady herself. The anxiety was suffocating. The thought of what might be happening on the ground was terrifying. Had something gone wrong with the airline? Was there a threat they weren't telling the passengers about? She had been so consumed by her personal situation earlier that she hadn't considered the bigger picture, the possibility that this flight was in danger. The descent was rough, the air thick with tension. Marlene's mind raced as the plane continued to descend, the city lights below growing larger and larger. The engines roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. She could feel her heartbeat in her chest, each thud louder than the last. It was as though time itself had slowed, every second stretching out into eternity. Then, the sudden impact of the wheels hitting the tarmac shook her from her thoughts. The plane bounced once, twice, before coming to a screeching halt. Marlene's breath caught in her throat as she exhaled sharply, her body frozen with shock. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The plane had landed. But where? What was going on? Why hadn't the captain given more details? The uncertainty was eating at her, each passing second amplifying the dread she felt. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and Marlene slowly unbuckled, her body stiff from the tension of the landing. She glanced around the cabin, taking in the faces of the other passengers. No one was moving quickly. The unease was palpable, and there was a strange, collective hesitation in the air. No one knew what had just happened, and the silence was deafening. The flight attendants were the first to move, swiftly standing and beginning to make their way toward the exit. Marlene followed their movements closely, her curiosity piqued by the urgency in their actions. There was no announcement from the captain, no indication of what was happening next. She felt like she was in the middle of a mystery that she didn't understand, but she had to know more. She had to find out what was going on, especially after everything that had happened. As Marlene stood up and began to make her way toward the exit, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find Janet standing beside her, her face pale. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," she said, her voice hushed but urgent. Marlene raised an eyebrow, confused and wary. "What's going on?" she asked, her heart pounding again. Janet hesitated, glancing around before speaking in a low voice. "There's something you need to know. Something that's bigger than you or me. We're not just dealing with a delayed flight. We're not just dealing with technical issues." Marlene's confusion deepened, and she instinctively took a step back. "What are you talking about?" Janet looked around once more before leaning in closer, lowering her voice even further. "The airline, it's in financial trouble. It's been taken over by someone who's making big changes. Someone who's here, right now, watching everything unfold." Marlene's mind spun, struggling to process Janet's words. "Taken over? What do you mean? Is the airline going bankrupt?" "I can't say too much," Janet continued, glancing nervously at the other passengers, who were now gathering near the exit. "But just know that the situation is complicated. This landing wasn't just about technical issues. Something bigger is at play. And I'm afraid you're going to be involved." Marlene felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what to make of Janet's cryptic words, but something about them struck her as true. She had felt all along that something more than a simple flight delay was at work. This was no accident. There were bigger forces at play, and she was somehow caught in the middle of them. As the last of the passengers disembarked and the crew began to prepare for the next phase of the journey, Marlene stood frozen, her thoughts swirling. This wasn't just a routine flight. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Marlene's mind was spinning with confusion and curiosity as she stepped off the plane. The strange and cryptic warning from Janet had left her with more questions than answers. What did it all mean? What kind of trouble was the airline really in? And why was she now being drawn into this mess? She had barely processed the chaos of the landing when the realization hit her: she had been part of something far bigger than she could have imagined. The airport was eerily quiet as passengers moved through the terminal in a somewhat orderly fashion, though their faces were filled with uncertainty. Marlene felt a cold sense of dread creeping over her, the air thick with tension. She barely noticed the attendants ushering everyone into a temporary holding area, their calm demeanor in stark contrast to the storm that was brewing inside her. As she moved through the corridor toward the lounge, Marlene caught sight of the flight crew, including Janet, huddled in a small group. They were speaking in low voices, but the words didn't need to be audible for Marlene to sense the weight of the conversation. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be thrust into a situation that was already beyond her control. She tried to push the thought aside as she entered the lounge. The space was modest, but the discomfort in the air was palpable. No one spoke, everyone simply sat in quiet anticipation. Marlene sat in one of the plush chairs, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of the day. The sudden landing, the unsettling announcement from the captain, the cryptic conversation with Janet, it all seemed connected. But how? Why? She couldn't stop herself from wondering just how deeply she was involved. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had become meaningless. The terminal lights buzzed overhead, their flickering adding to the sense of unease. A sudden movement caught her attention, and she turned to see a man in a sharp suit walking toward her. His presence commanded the room. He was tall, with a stern expression and a purposeful stride. Marlene's gut twisted with the realization that she recognized him. It was the CEO of the airline, a man she had seen on the news countless times, his image frequently accompanying stories about the airline's financial troubles. He stopped in front of her, his piercing eyes locking with hers. "You're Marlene Foster," he said, his voice smooth, but with a hint of underlying tension. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. The last thing she had expected was for the CEO himself to approach her. She hadn't even known he was on the flight. She nodded slowly, trying to hide the unease building within her. "Yes, I'm Marlene," she replied cautiously. "What's going on? Why are we here?" The CEO glanced around the room, his expression hardening as he lowered his voice. I know this is all very sudden and unsettling for you, but things have taken a turn for the worse. The airline is facing financial collapse, and there's been a shift in leadership. We need your help. Marlene blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. My help? She repeated incredulously. I don't understand. I'm just a passenger. What could I possibly do to help? The CEO's gaze softened for a brief moment, before he continued. You have something we need. You're not just any ordinary passenger. We've been monitoring you since the moment you stepped on board, and we believe you have the resources to make a difference. You have connections, influence, and more importantly, you have access to the right people. This airline, my company, needs someone like you to step in and take control. Marlene felt as though the ground beneath her was shifting. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling now. I don't know anything about business or running an airline. I'm not the person you need. The CEO didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. You're right about one thing, he said slowly. You're not a typical corporate leader, but you have something far more valuable, an untapped potential. This airline is being taken over by an investment group, but it's not just about money. It's about power, control, and positioning in the global market. We need someone who can make bold decisions, someone with the will and the ability to act decisively. Someone who understands what it means to take charge in a crisis. Marlene's confusion deepened, but her instincts were starting to kick in. There was something about the CEO's tone that made her question everything. She had never been in a position to make such high-level decisions, but there was a nagging sense that she couldn't simply walk away from this. There was more at play here than a simple corporate takeover. This was about something far bigger. The CEO paused, allowing his words to settle in the air between them. I know this is overwhelming, he said. But if you want to walk away, you can. We'll give you the option. But if you stay, and help us, it will change everything for you. This company, this airline, it could be yours. Marlene's heart raced as the full weight of his words crashed into her. The implication was clear: she could walk away from this, leave it all behind, or she could step into a world of power and influence she had never dreamed possible. But what would it cost her? What was really at stake? Her mind was in turmoil as the CEO waited for her response. The tension in the room was suffocating. Marlene had always been an ordinary woman, leading an ordinary life. She had worked hard, raised her children, and lived humbly. But now, she was being offered something extraordinary, a chance to change the course of an entire airline's future, and her own. What's the catch? She finally asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. The CEO's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. The catch is that if you accept, there will be no turning back. Your life as you know it will be gone. You'll be thrust into a world of high stakes, of boardroom deals, and public scrutiny. There will be no peace. No going back to what you knew. But you'll have power. You'll have influence. And more than that, you'll have the chance to reshape this company, reshape the world. Marlene stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of the decision she was being asked to make. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the consequences of either choice so monumental that it was impossible to see the path ahead clearly. For the first time in her life, she realized that one decision could change everything, could change not just her future, but the future of the airline, and perhaps even the world of aviation itself. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. I need to think, she said quietly. The CEO nodded. Of course. But don't take too long. The offer won't last forever. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Marlene standing alone in the quiet lounge, her mind a whirlpool of thoughts and emotions. The moment she had been thrust into was beyond her understanding, but it was also undeniable. She had a choice to make. A choice that could reshape her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As she sat back in the chair, the weight of it all settling on her shoulders, she realized that there would be no going back. Her life was no longer ordinary. Whatever came next, it would be a turning point, a moment that would determine not only her future but the future of the airline, and perhaps the world. Marlene sat in the dimly lit lounge, her thoughts swirling in a storm of confusion, disbelief, and a strange sense of anticipation. The CEO's words echoed in her mind, haunting her with their gravity. She had always led a quiet, unassuming life, one defined by small, everyday moments. Now, she was faced with the impossible, a decision that could upend her world, send her spiraling into uncharted territory, and place her in a position of unimaginable power. The CEO's offer lingered in her mind like an unspoken promise, a tantalizing glimpse into a future she never thought possible. She stared down at her hands, gripping the armrest tightly, feeling the weight of her life's choices pressing down on her. It was hard to process everything. She could still remember the days of her youth, those carefree moments before responsibilities and expectations had shaped her into the person she was today. She had always been just a regular woman, mother, daughter, friend. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing to stand out. But now, for the first time in her life, she was offered the chance to change that. To become someone who held influence, who could reshape the course of a major corporation. The thought was overwhelming. Her eyes drifted toward the windows, where the faint lights of the airport glowed in the distance, reflecting off the slick tarmac. Outside, the world continued on, oblivious to the crossroads she now found herself at. She could hear the faint hum of conversations from other passengers still milling about, but she was alone in her thoughts. Alone with the choice that lay ahead. The lounge was strangely silent as the minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. Marlene felt like she was suspended in time, unable to move forward or back, trapped in a decision that felt too large to comprehend. Should she walk away from it all? Should she return to her quiet life, to her routine, to her family, and forget this whole ordeal? Or should she embrace the offer, step into the unknown, and wield the kind of power that had always seemed so far out of reach? As she mulled over the choice, a voice interrupted her reverie. It was Janet, the flight attendant, her face flushed with anxiety. She hurried over to Marlene's side, her eyes darting around the room nervously before she spoke in a hushed tone. "Marlene, please, you have to understand. You're not just being asked to take over an airline. You're being asked to change everything. The situation is more complicated than you know." Marlene's heart quickened at the mention of her name, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "What do you mean? What's really going on?" Janet took a seat beside her, glancing over her shoulder once more to ensure they were not overheard. "There are forces at play here that you can't even begin to imagine. The CEO is just the tip of the iceberg. This isn't about saving the airline. It's about something bigger, something far more dangerous." Marlene's breath caught in her throat, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She had suspected there was more to the story than what the CEO had told her, but now Janet's words added a layer of dread she hadn't anticipated. "Dangerous? What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Janet's eyes locked with hers, the intensity in her gaze unmistakable. "This airline is more than just a business. It's part of a much larger network, a web of power, money, and control that stretches far beyond what you can see. The people who want to take over this airline, they're not interested in just profits. They're interested in reshaping the global economy, in consolidating power in ways that could change everything, everything we know about the world." Marlene's mind reeled. She had always thought of airlines as businesses, places where people worked, earned their living, and went about their day. But now, she realized that this airline, this moment, was a microcosm of something far larger. Janet's words painted a picture of a high-stakes game, one that wasn't just about money, but about power on a global scale. "Marlene," Janet continued, her voice urgent, "they'll do whatever it takes to get what they want. And if you take this offer, if you step into this world, there's no turning back. You'll be in the middle of a battle that could shake the foundations of everything you've ever known. This is about control, and the price for winning that control is far higher than you realize." The weight of Janet's warning settled heavily in Marlene's chest, a suffocating sense of dread pooling in the pit of her stomach. The quiet life she had always known felt like a distant memory, slipping further away with each passing second. She was no longer just a passenger on a plane. She was being pulled into a world of power and manipulation, one that threatened to consume her, body and soul. Marlene stood up abruptly, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her thighs, trying to steady herself. "What do I do? What do you want me to do?" Janet looked up at her, her expression filled with sympathy, but also a hard edge of resolve. "I can't tell you what to do, Marlene. But I want you to understand that this is bigger than just an airline. This is about control over industries, over economies, over lives. The people pulling the strings behind the scenes, those are the people who shape the world. If you walk into this world, you'll be taking a step into something that can't be undone. The question is, do you want that power? Do you want to be the one to steer this ship, or do you want to walk away and let them dictate everything?" Marlene felt the weight of those words crash into her. There was no escaping the gravity of the situation. Whatever decision she made, it would be the start of something she could not control. She would either join the power struggle or leave it all behind, but either way, her life would never be the same. The room was silent now, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. The other passengers were still scattered around the lounge, unaware of the battle raging just beneath the surface of the world they were about to re-enter. Marlene stood there, staring out the window, watching the planes take off into the night sky, wondering if she was ready to step into that unknown. After what felt like an eternity, she turned back to Janet. "What if I say yes?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens then?" Janet stood, her face softening for the first time since they'd begun talking. "If you say yes, you'll be given everything, the resources, the influence, the ability to shape the future. But you'll also become a target. They won't stop until they've either taken what they want or eliminated anyone who stands in their way. It's a game of survival, Marlene. And once you enter it, you won't be able to leave." The finality in Janet's voice sent a chill down Marlene's spine. She had no illusions left. This was no longer a simple decision. It wasn't just about whether she should take over the airline. It was about whether she was willing to risk everything, her future, her safety, even her very identity, to play a game with stakes she couldn't yet fully comprehend. The airport's lights flickered once more, casting long shadows across the room. Marlene felt the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just about a business transaction. This was about choosing a path that would define the rest of her life. She knew that the next few hours would decide everything. The world she had known would vanish, and the world she was being offered would either swallow her whole or lift her to unimaginable heights. One thing was certain, there was no going back. Marlene stood at the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. The room around her seemed to close in, the hum of the airport and the quiet murmur of other passengers fading into a dull buzz. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of what was to come. She could feel her pulse quicken, her heart hammering in her chest as the magnitude of the moment fully dawned on her. The choice she was about to make wasn't just about her, it was about everything she had ever known, everything she had believed. It was about stepping into a world where nothing was certain, where every move she made would echo through the corridors of power in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Janet's words still lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that this wasn't just a simple business decision, it was a war for control, a battle that would pit her against forces she wasn't sure she could even comprehend. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever encountered, and now, more than ever, she had to decide if she was ready to face them. Could she really step into a role where her every move would be scrutinized, where she would be forced to navigate the treacherous waters of corporate warfare? Could she handle the responsibility of holding the fate of a global airline, and perhaps something even greater, within her hands? The decision felt impossible. Part of her wanted to walk away, to return to her quiet life, where she knew her place, where she didn't have to fight against the currents of a world she wasn't prepared to face. But then, another part of her, the part that had always longed for more, that had dreamed of something greater, urged her to take the leap. This was her chance to make a difference, to carve out her own legacy, to stand tall in a world that had always seemed too big for someone like her. Marlene took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had always been someone who had played by the rules, who had followed the path set before her. She had raised her children, worked hard, and lived a life of quiet service. But this was something else entirely. This was her chance to be someone who would be remembered, to take the reins of an empire and shape it according to her vision. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about the possibility of changing the world. But it came with a price she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. As she wrestled with her thoughts, the door to the lounge opened, and the CEO entered once more, his expression unreadable. He was flanked by 2 security personnel, but there was a calmness about him, a sense of control that seemed almost too perfect. He walked toward Marlene, his steps measured, purposeful. "Have you made your decision?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Marlene met his gaze, trying to read him, to figure out what was behind his calm exterior. Was he truly as confident as he appeared, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? "I'm still thinking," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't take this kind of decision lightly." The CEO nodded, seemingly unfazed. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But understand this opportunity won't last forever. The world is moving fast, and the people who can't keep up are left behind." Marlene's stomach churned at the implication. She had known that the offer was time-sensitive, but the CEO's words made the urgency feel all the more real. She could sense the pressure mounting, the world outside the lounge moving forward, oblivious to the battle that was raging within her. "I don't know if I can handle this," Marlene admitted, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "I've never been in a position like this. I'm just an ordinary woman. I don't have the skills or the experience to run a company like this." The CEO's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. "You're more capable than you realize, Marlene. This isn't about experience, it's about vision. You have the instincts. You have the ability to see the bigger picture. All you need is the courage to act. Everything else will fall into place." Marlene felt a flicker of doubt. Could she really do this? Could she step into a role that would require her to make decisions that would impact thousands of lives? She had no business background, no experience in corporate warfare. She had always been a caretaker, a listener, not a leader. But what if she was more capable than she thought? What if the CEO was right? She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to picture the path ahead. The life she had always known seemed so far removed from the world the CEO was describing. She thought of her children, her family, her quiet life. Could she really give it all up for a chance to become someone else, someone powerful, someone whose decisions could change the fate of an entire industry? But as she thought about it, she realized that she was already changing. The very fact that she had been thrust into this situation meant that the old Marlene, the one who quietly accepted what life gave her, was no longer the person she was meant to be. This was her moment. The world had chosen her for this. Whether she liked it or not, she had been given an opportunity, a chance to make her mark on history. And if she walked away now, would she regret it forever? The CEO continued to watch her, his eyes calculating. You have everything you need to succeed, Marlene, he said softly. All you have to do is take the first step. Marlene opened her eyes and met his gaze, her resolve beginning to solidify. She had always been someone who believed in the power of choice, in the idea that the path she walked was hers to determine. And now, she realized, the path before her was hers as well. It was up to her to decide whether she would step into this new life or turn away from it forever. Without another word, she stood up. Her heart raced, but a sense of clarity washed over her, as if she had finally made the decision that had been swirling in her mind for hours. She had been given a chance, a rare, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. She had doubts, yes. She had fears. But she had something else too, the will to act, the courage to face the unknown, and the strength to fight for what she believed in. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm. The CEO's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't the smile of a man who had won, it was the smile of a man who had just enlisted someone into his war. Good. You won't regret this, he said, though there was something in his voice that made Marlene wonder whether he truly believed that. As he turned to leave, Marlene felt a strange calm settle over her. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. She had entered a world of high stakes, a world of power and intrigue, and the journey ahead would be unlike anything she had ever known. But whatever came next, she was ready. Ready to face the challenges. Ready to shape her future. Ready to change the world. The door to the lounge clicked shut behind the CEO, and Marlene was left standing alone, a sense of finality settling over her. The next chapter of her life was about to begin.